Episode 8, we will go over making the grid, which you see here, for the lanterns. I don't put grids on all the lanterns. They're actually quite time consuming, but they actually add another class of decorativeness to the lanterns. We'll go over making the handles and making the hold downs for the handles. So this should be a fairly interesting segment, and when we make the handles, I'll go into what I refer to as counterintuitive bending, which should be interesting for you all. Also, during episode 8, we'll go into the feet that go on the bottom of these, as well as the glass clips that would hold the glass in place and the mirrors in place. So that really covers episode 8. I'm now going to show you how to make the handles that we use for some of the lanterns. Obviously, it's basically a nice fit for the hand, as you can see. One of the problems in making the handles is the fact that the brazing rod is actually quite stiff. And I'm using an imperial bender to bend it to obtain the right radius. And so this part's pretty easy. Bring it right around, and you can see that we have bent almost 180 degrees. In order to relieve some of the stress on this, I'll heat it, which will soften the material, really annealing it and making it get fairly close to 180 degrees. Okay, so now I take it out, and as you can see, we're probably about 10 to 15 degrees short. So to put the other bend in it, I put it in the bender again. When I check it for the template, it's basically pretty close. So again, I bend it. The same process of annealing it or softening the metal. Okay, now what I need to do is take and cut both these pieces so that when I do my final squeeze it will come together, and I'll use these heavy-duty bolt cutters. Okay, so I cut both of them. One is still a little bit long. I'll cut the single one. Okay, so the next step to close it is I put it in this vise and I center it, and I'll go through, as you can see, that's how it looks. I'll go through the heating process. Now, the thing that's really important when you put the hold down mechanism, this has to be straight, flat, and then straight this way. So there's always a little, let me call it, fiddling around to accomplish that. Now, I've also bent these around mandrels, which is even a little bit more challenging because you actually have to heat them when you bend them. And sometimes the heat has not been uniform, and they really are out of shape when you get done. And as you can see, I'm getting pretty close to the exact shape that I want. And this thing is going to be pretty hot. Okay, and there we have it. Obviously this thing is pretty hot. In fact, it's probably too hot for these gloves, but you can see it pretty well aligned. Pretty good job. On some of the bulkhead ship lanterns, I put this handle, and one of the interesting things to make for the handle is the retainer clip which holds it onto the top of the wind deflector. It's a little unusual how we do this. First off, I've cut the pieces out, and I've bent them to put a slight round angle in them so they'll fit on top. And to do that, I use just this large piece of pipe. So you're familiar with how to fold something. Well, I folded this up into a box or a channel section. Now this is what I call counterintuitive bending. You need a nice sharp break line, and I'll show you one that's somewhat in progress right here, so that it looks clean and neat. Now what I have here in the vise is a piece of flat bar, 1/4 inch thick, and I've rounded the surface. So now that I've got it bent to a channel, I'll take it and I'll put it in here. And this is kind of a manual process. I'll start to bend it, and I'll flip it over just to make sure that I'm doing it equally on both sides. And as you can see, it's kind of forming a flying W. And I'll continue on. And pretty much there you have it. This will fit in a groove. Let me get one that's a little bit better fit here. Fit in a groove like this. It will slide back and forth. What I'll do is I'll round the corners, and I usually do that afterwards. I probably out of 4, one may not turn out so hot, so I toss them. And that's pretty straightforward. I always refer to that as counterintuitive bending, because when you think about it, it's like, no, that will never work. But it works just fine. It's really the only way you can do it. You saw me bend these handle retainer clips, and as you can see, they have a contour bend on them that is similar to that of the lantern, which is important, because if you don't do that, it's pretty hard to do it when you're trying to put it in place. Now, the process I use, I've already marked this one out, and I'll take my center punch and center punch it on the scribe lines. You pretty much have to scribe a line in so that you get a uniform pattern. And then I take my Whitney Junior punch, and it's got a dimple in the punch set on the top die, so you just put it in those holes and squeeze it, and that creates a hole for your rivets. Okay, so there we have it. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can actually take and put the rivets through. I have rivet sets. What I've decided to do on this is to put what I'll call faulty rivets in. The rivets look great here, but they don't go all the way through. And the benefit of that is, a lot of times when you're setting rivets, you distort the material, and this is a foolproof way of preventing that. Now, I have various handles that I made. Now this one here is been tinned, and basically the way you tin a handle is you just heat up the brass material and you apply tin, and then I usually take a piece of 4/0 stainless steel and wipe it down, or you can use a regular cotton cloth. And you can see, obviously, I didn't apply it right here at this location because it was not necessary. It'll be hidden and covered up by that. So this gives you a nice look. I could get stainless steel, but I don't make too many of these, so I don't have any stainless steel 3/16 stock in place. Now the attachments of these, and you're going to go, wow, this looks a little crazy, because I'm going to put a brass attachment on here. So you go, wow, why would you put something like that on? Well, I've decided I'm going to paint it black, and the brass accent looks really good with black, and I'll put a grid on it which would also be brass. So this is another different approach. Right now I have 3 silvered looking ones, the turn tin, the zinc one, and the tin plate. So let me just get a little tack here. And I'll go to the back side and hold it down with this piece of wood. And there you have it. Basically, the handle's in place. Obviously, it's still a little bit hot. So that's how you put a handle in. Now we're going to go over the assembly of the grid. And of course, these were put on lanterns to protect the glass. And this is what it would look like on the lantern. It's kind of a time-consuming process to make these. And generally, I only put them on specific lanterns for that reason. So the first thing to do is to bend this 90-degree turn right here. And I've established a makeshift gauge, which I'll go up against my machinist's vise. And then I'll, of course, tighten that. And let me check it. There we go. And then I bend it over, and I take a rawhide hammer, and I beat it to form the 90. Now this is, the stock that I had was a little long. I'll cut it off, and then I'll show you how I trim these at the end. So basically that's one, and on each lantern there's, if we put them on all 3 sides, there's 8, 16, 24. So that's a lot of wire. So again, bend it over, use a rawhide mallet. And the reason I use a rawhide mallet is because it doesn't actually mar the brass rod. And trim it off. Now, before I started, and this is pretty old because I've used it many times, I put together a template. In each one of these holes that you see right here is where the rod would go to properly fit on the grill. Now, I've made a wooden jig or template to actually hold the grills. I have two sizes. One size is for the door, which is smaller, and then the other side's for the sides. So I put them on here, as you can see. I take and put lightweight on them to hold them in place. Then I take and put my solder paste on, and then I will take and solder the two at the rods together at their intersection. Now, one of the benefits of having a jig is it also keeps the rods so that they're perpendicular to the wood. In other words, there's really no other good way of doing it. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So now I'll take and I'll solder the two rods together at the intersection point. I let these things kind of run wild and then trim them later because it's much easier to do it in this operation. This piece of wood here is a 3/8 piece of plywood, so I'm going to trim them so that they're at 3/8. I just take my cutters and just go through here and okay, so now I'm checking to see how they turned out. Actually, they're pretty close. So now in order to attach them to the lantern, I use a process that I take these snippets, which are all cut generally to the same length, and heat them. And as you can see, they roll into balls. So, and that's because this is a surface that just won't stick to. So I will take this and put some no-crode on, and I'll take one of these balls, and let it cool down. That's how that's done. So let me take one that I've completed, and I'm going to solder this to the actual door frame. Put this off on the side. So I take the door frame and I position it, again, center it. Now I need to put some weight on here to hold it in place. Okay, so now the process is to take the torch and to heat up around the metal so that it actually attaches. And you have to really be careful because it's... So the best way to do it is kind of like this intermediate heating, and you can actually see the metal start to run. You also got to be careful you don't unsolder something that's already been soldered. Okay, there we go. Now wait till the last one's dry. Take off my weight or solidify. It's going to be a little bit hot, so throw a glove on. So there you have it. You can see how they're welded. They still look like Hershey Kisses if you do it right. And that's kind of one of the tricks of the trade. It takes quite a few glass clips to hold the glass in place, plus to hold the mirrors in place. Now the glass clips that I would use for brass would be brass on the two sides. The brass clips that I would use for the back would be actually tin plate, and I use tin because they're silver and they blend in with the mirror glass that will end up going on the back. The way I mass produce these, I take a piece of stock and I cut it to 1 inch, and then I tin it, and then I run it through the shear and I chop them into 1/4 inch pieces like this. Then I take my pair of pliers, and actually this is a pair of glass pliers, but it works pretty well, and I have this blue tape on here to have a gauge on how far it goes in, and then I just manually bend it into place. Now when I solder them, I'll hold them into place either with a screwdriver or sometimes a clamp, and just heat them or use a regular solder. On the clips, I would also use these clips for turn tin, tin plate, and zinc. And the reason is because on turn tin, the turn tin is so difficult to bend. These are fairly flexible, so it will easily bend around the glass without breaking. Now, the feet that I put on these lanterns look like this. They're really U-shaped. They're basically a 1/2 inch wide and they're 1/4 inch deep. To show you how I install them on a lantern, I basically take my no-crode and I put a little dab in each corner. I have previously tinned these. I actually put 4 of them on, and I pretty much do this by eyeball. I mean, you can get really, really accurate, but the fact is there's probably not a lot of benefit in doing that. Okay, so let me take and heat these up. And that's how you put the feet on. If you have tin feet or zinc feet, you actually have to solder them in place, but I always like working with this medium because it's actually easier to do. So that takes care of the feet. And the last piece of material is the spacer clips that I need. And I need these when I put the mirror in the back. I cut the mirror so that, if you look at this, I cut the mirror so that it fits between these two dimensions. So I have to push it all the way up to the top. And what I do is I put one of these here in this location, and obviously it would lay flat. So when I pull the mirror down, it only goes down halfway, so it doesn't fall out. So these are just kind of little behind-the-scene spacers that nobody ever knows. I usually make them out of turn tin. I hope you've enjoyed episode 8. The next episode 9 will be the glazing of the lanterns, putting all the different types of glass that we can use in them, attaching them, and the fun part of polishing and varnishing this turn tin is because when I fold it, it has a kind of an open fold joint, so that makes it a little bit wider, and that works pretty good for me.